This is a brief show and tell session, really, on some research I did with some colleagues of mine from Alt.Advisory, testing South Africa's data protection law, and specifically the new transparency tools that are built into that data protection law that give, ostensibly on paper, the right of access to information about how AI is being used on people's personal information. Now, lots of industries are using or talking about using AI to supercharge their data profiling efforts. And what that basically means is writing software to get access to information about their customers or potential customers, analyzing that information to try to detect what those customers might want to buy or do, whether those customers can be trusted to pay back a loan. In some cases, whether our behavior can be shaped as consumers or citizens to buy or invest in something that we might not have done otherwise. And so there's huge uses of this in sales, in behavior change, in debt and loans, in policing, and all those lovely things. So the risks for discrimination and the fact that this kind of power can be abused is one very good reason why most modern data protection laws include some kind of safeguard against what they call automated decision making, which essentially means AI-driven decision making. And they also typically, these laws include some kind of transparency tool so that people whose personal information has been subject to some kind of AI-driven data profiling can find out about it and figure out what happened and therefore sort of enforce their rights. Now, in many countries, including South Africa, this kind of provision is actually the only formal AI transparency mechanism that's actually put into a law. And in the South African case, it's only been enforced for less than 2 years. But how well does this kind of new law and sort of legal mechanism work? Now, we've approached last year 14 high-profile South African companies in financial services, banking, insurance, electronic retailers, and we brought formal requests for information to them using this new law. And we asked them whether they were using AI to profile their customers, and if so, how. We also went to 2 major government agencies with the same question. The spoiler is what we learned, perhaps unsurprisingly, is that these existing laws really fall very short of actually ensuring the kind of degree of transparency and accountability that we would want to see over how companies are using AI to profile their customers. A summary of what we found: 1 in 3 companies simply didn't respond to the request at all. They ghosted us. And only about half of them actually gave us any kind of substantive answer or an attempt to answer the question we had about AI. Those responses were generally quite vague and sometimes really confusing. Interestingly, in some of the cases, the responses were not just confusing, but appeared to be confused. The companies themselves seemed really not to understand the technology or the legal questions at play. And in some cases, as we detail in the report, we spent quite a lot of time on hold on the phone as these companies passed us from one department to another, trying to figure out what to do with us. Now, the sectors that we assume have the most sophisticated use of AI, and that's usually in financial services, mostly did confirm that they were using AI, unsurprisingly. But their answers really didn't provide any meaningful information about how they were using it and what for. In other words, they gave us a response, but it really didn't answer the question. Essentially, what we found is that existing laws just didn't help us understand how AI is being used on our data, which makes oversight, if not difficult, impossible. Now, on one hand, these findings might be quite depressing, bearing in mind that we are a group of nerds who take a special interest in the law and in technology. The fact that we couldn't get these tools to work suggests that most ordinary people are going to find them completely useless. But if you can allow me to be a nerd who's excited about the law and about technology for a bit longer, there are a few reasons to be excited and optimistic. You could think of these AI provisions in data protection laws as a kind of new door that's been installed to potentially give us better access to this hidden world of AI-driven data profiling. Now, in Africa alone, there are at least 29 countries that have laws in place, many of them adopted within the last 5 years, that have similar AI-related provisions to the ones that we used in the South African case. And the opportunity here is for anyone in the research space or for citizen activists to test these mechanisms for themselves. Submit those transparency requests to companies in your own context. It's like turning the door handle to see if it opens. And like a door with stiff new hinges, maybe the mechanisms will work better if we use them more. Or maybe just by asking the question, we can raise the profile of this issue and put it higher up on the policy agenda, on the social agenda. But at the same time, I have to admit, we need to make sure that these are not doors that lead to nowhere. The tools are only going to work if there is a political, social, and a legal climate in which companies and government agencies know that there is a real cost in not being compliant, a financial cost, a legal cost, a social cost. Now, perhaps part of the solution is improving and expanding the regulation we see in each country and at a regional level. So in African context, we have this, the AU's Malabo Convention, which would be a continent-wide data protection framework. And digital activists could push for this to be adopted. They could push for their own countries to adopt data protection laws if there isn't one in place, or to get better implementation and enforcement of the laws that are already there. But I must admit, maybe we also need to design new and better doors. And that means testing whether this kind of transparency tool is actually fit for purpose at all. If the problems that we're facing, if these challenges that we experience in this research is not just about bad enforcement or implementation, but that maybe this type of law is actually just not well designed to give us the kind of transparency we need about this use of AI. It needs to feed into the broader discussions that are happening as a part of Mozfest proceedings, of course, about whether we need actually new AI transparency tools, specific legislation, specific regulation, industry codes and industry charters, whatever it takes. And so the research that we've kind of done this brief session on today is really just a contribution to the start of that conversation. And, I do want to draw us back to the fact that there is this big implementation gap for digital rights activists to test in their own context. These are the doors that I'm talking about that we hope can lead us to a more transparent and accountable use of AI. And so I would close here by saying if anyone is interested in trying to launch a similar initiative, essentially to test that door in their own context, we would be more than happy to chat, to compare notes, and obviously do anything else we can to help you on your way. So if you'd like to talk further, you can find us at alt.advisory.africa. You can find the research at ai.altadvisory.africa. Thanks so much for coming.